All right, thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining. We are gathered here to talk about probably on the biggest challenge I think Ethereum has, which is how do we consolidate the entirety of the greater Ethereum, from the rollups to Ethereum DL1. Recently, you saw Vitalik talk about value capturing as well, and I think that's part of the discussion. And I'm joined by a few of the great minds in this space, Mudit, Edward, and Amrit, to chat about exactly that. My name is Alon. I'm the CEO of SSV Labs. We are the core team behind SSV Network. And I want to have a go around between the different speakers. So, Mudit, if you can kick us off, give us a quick intro about yourself and about Polygon.
Yeah, for sure. Hey, folks, I'm Mudit. I'm the CTO at Polygon Labs. And Polygon Labs is like helping solve Ethereum interop by building AltLayer, which is a settlement and interop protocol. And apart from that, Polygon Labs also obviously has the Polygon chain focused towards finance and payments.
Awesome. Edward, you want to continue?
Sure. Hey guys, my name is Edward. I'm the head of BD at Succinct. We are making ZK proofs more accessible to the wider blockchain ecosystem and beyond. We're most known for our rollup product, OP Succinct, which allows any OP stack rollup to become a ZK rollup. And we work with many great teams in the space, including Polygon and Katana. But also what's really relevant for this particular call is earlier this year, we were the first ZK team to achieve real-time Ethereum proving, which is a really exciting milestone for Ethereum scaling and also Ethereum interop.
Awesome. Thank you. Amrit?
Hi. Thanks for inviting me. My name is Amrit. I handle operations at AltLayer. We are a rollup as a service provider, so we help people deploy rollups. So people and clients that want to build or have their own chain, they come to us and they set the requirements. For example, they want a custom gas token, they want certain type of sequencing policy and whatnot, and we help set up that infrastructure for them so that they can go and focus on building on the app layer and trying to focus on distribution. So we handle all the infra, and the clients and the customers can go and focus on distribution and app building.
Great. Awesome. So I want to set the stage for us for why interop is so important. And I'll give a quick context and let me know if you guys agree with how I see the challenge or the problem. And so there's a big technical challenge on how do you scale blockchains. There are different answers to that, but Ethereum chose horizontal scaling, basically saying there is this concept called a rollup, where we separate between data and computation. Rollups can do a lot of computation and have a very small fingerprint on the Ethereum L1 itself. And that was the path, or is the path, to grow Ethereum, although of course, we have many L1 proposals to increase Ethereum's capacity as well. But the aftermath of this type of scaling is that, on the one hand, obviously we can scale Ethereum, and a lot of the traffic today for the greater Ethereum ecosystem is done by Ethereum rollups. But on the other hand, each one of those rollups becomes its own kind of island, economic island, if you will, where it encapsulates a bunch of different users and transactions. But between it and Ethereum, it's very hard to maintain the same UX as you expect on Ethereum. And of course, between the rollups, we have the same challenge. This is kind of the setup of the challenge, if you will. And so I want to go one by one. And one, of course, if you have anything to add or you see it differently, I would love to hear that. But also, what is the current state of interop? What works well and what doesn't? And later on, maybe we'll dive into what can potentially happen in the next 12 months. Who wants to get us going?
Maybe I can say what works well, and then we can discuss what doesn't work so well. The one thing that we have, of course, seen at least, a year or 2 years ago was this idea of lock and mint style bridging. So let's say if you have two chains, whether two L1s or two rollups, a very straightforward of doing things is basically locking assets on one chain and minting on the other one. And that kind of has worked, of course, with all sorts of bridge hacks and everything that comes with it. But people have generally been, okay with that kind of experience. That definitely has become much better with intent-centric, protocols and systems that are out there. But most of them are still very, focused on token transfers or token movements. Of course, that extends to swaps in some ways, but that's in no way generic enough. And what I mean by generic enough is this, again, this whole idea of composability, where, composability might seem very weird term, but basically means that this the ability for one app to read and write, in some other contract's current state. So if, let's say, if you have Uniswap and if you have, I don't know, Aave can read into what Uniswap is doing right now, and then it could take some action based on that. So composability from a token perspective, which is basically what's called asynchronous composability, it kind of exists today already, and people are somewhat okay with it, especially from a token transfer perspective. But it doesn't work very well beyond that. And then, of course, it creates all sorts of issues around, as you mentioned earlier, fragmentation of user, fragmentation of liquidity, and that's not ideal. And this is where, again, we'll discuss more deeper during the call of exploring ideas with base sequencing and whatnot.
Edward?
Yeah, I have to say, yeah, I think that's a great summary from Amrit. Yeah, I think in the last couple of years, we've made really great strides in making bridging feel much better as a UX. And I think that's largely based on all the great work that teams like Layer 0 and Across have done to really smooth out the experience. But yeah, no, like as we think about what is really required to drive really interesting use cases like flash loans, which I know you guys at SSV are really excited about, the existing system is just not quite enough, and we can think about ways to get there.
Edward, you are Mudit, you guys are obviously with AltLayer are putting the heart and center the ability to extend composability far beyond just token bridges. What do you think? One, stating the problem, the challenge, and two, of course, what is the current state you see and the opportunities it unfolds?
Yeah, for sure. In terms of things that work very well, the individual bridges from Ethereum into a given roller are pretty much sorted for now. The default bridges with all of the various L2 stacks work pretty well. The problem happens where you have to go from one roll up to another. Most of the times, Ethereum is still a bottleneck there, at least from a protocol layer, because the funds currently are required to go back to Ethereum and then enter another L2. So if we had a unified bridge, or if all of the protocols L2s agreed to a unified standard for interop, we could eliminate that bottleneck, and users would be able to have full composability and full interop between, at least for assets, between all rollups, rather than rollups feeling like side chains of Ethereum. That's where AltLayer comes in. That's where the concept of unified bridge comes in. All of the AltLayer chains have share this unified bridge that settles on Ethereum. Once you enter the unified bridge, you can move between any of the AltLayer chains very freely, and that's for assets. Same goes for messages as well. Since all of the AltLayer chains adhere to the same standard, they all can receive each and everyone's messages fairly easily. It's a solution. Like, the implementation is obviously different, but same problem Optimism Supernet, for example, is trying to solve in a different way. But yeah, they are now forming. The next problem we'll see is, like, there will be clusters of these interop zones where like Optimism chains are interacting with each other, Arbitrum chains with each other, AltLayer with each other. But that's why, like, with AltLayer specifically, we are protocol / chain agnostic. First of all, like, any chain, any stack can join AltLayer, as long as it just follows the standard. You don't need to use OP stack or whatever. Everything is supported. It's just, at the end of the day, it's just a question of following the ZK standard. Anyone can adopt that. Second, with additional tooling that we are building, our aim is to combine all these different clusters as well. We know, like, because of business reasons or whatever, there would be some chains that would be like that would stay unique to OP's network or whatever. But we can connect them as well by building things on top, using intents, for example. We can still connect them to the unified bridge. So that's what we are working on.
So if I need to maybe try to paint a picture, current state of interop mainly focuses on bridging. In some cases, maybe swaps, but let's say those terms are interchangeable for a lot of technical reasons. But mostly we have two categories of interop. We have either liquidity based, which are intents, which present really great UX. I think just now I saw Layer 0 coming up with, I think maybe a few seconds worth of bridging time, which is, from a user perspective, is great. But obviously it's limited by liquidity, both in terms of the amount of liquidity, but also tokens. I don't think, if you go down the list of the tokens, other than Ethereum, USDC, USDT, I'm not entirely sure what the liquidity does there. And then we have another category, which is asynchronous composability, which is message driven, which is basically can solve all of the different composability challenge we have, but it's fairly slow because it needs to wait for confirmations, et cetera, et cetera. And so, if that's the current case, what is the best case scenario for interop? Let's say we solve all of the technical challenges. There's no business limitations at all. What is the best use case or UX we can expect from composability? Is it something like Ethereum, where I have instant transactions which are fairly complex, which are atomic, and so on, or can't we really get there? Or in other words, can we get to synchronous composability, which is kind of this term thrown around for the last couple of years? Can we get there? Can we as a community reach that? And if that is actually a relevant goal to set?
Yeah, sure, I can jump in quick. So for me, like, I think there are two things here. One is, first, the underlying bridging protocols and settlement. It definitely needs to become much faster than it is right now. There are the way to do it is again twofold. One, the actual change where bridging is happening can be L1, L2, whatever. Um, if they had faster finality, then that would allow bridges obviously to settle faster. For example, Polygon POS has like 3 to 4 second finality using milestone features. So you can have outgoing bridging from Polygon POS within 3 to 4 seconds with full finality, no risk. That's one thing. The other is risk-based bridging. So the protocols can define basically a risk approach where, especially the intent-based protocols, where they can, let's say, bridge anything under 100,000 with one block confirmation from a major L2. But for $1 million, they need to wait for 10 block confirmation. For anything higher, they need to wait for full finality. And whatever. So the exact numbers can be defined, but some risk-based approach. When you combine these two things, you will have basically 99 percentile of bridging transactions will be completed within, let's say, 5 to 10 seconds. Once you are able to hit this, where again, like, it's not 100%, it's 99%, but at this point it's good enough to build solutions on top which abstract all of this complexity. So imagine a multi-chain wallet which just abstracts all of the chains from you completely. It just, you connect it to an app and it shows you aggregated balance that you have across all chains. It moves funds from wherever needed to whichever chain needed as you are doing transactions. The users don't need to care about the underlying blockchain or bridging or the protocol at all.
But it is bridging. Of course, it's a necessary condition for the ultimate UX. But is it the sufficient as well? I mean, even if we have very fast bridging, is we still have that asynchronous nature to the UX, right? You need to do a bridge, and then you can act on the destination chain. And then if you want your assets back to the original chain, you need to do another transaction. So there is this step-by-step process. Is that a problem? Even if it's fast, is that a problem? Or do we need to maybe try to get closer to what the UX on Ethereum today, which is I don't have any steps, right? I can do a very complex set of transactions in one go.
Yeah, it's obviously not ideal to have that async bridging experience, but as long as it's under 10 seconds, it's manageable. Obviously, like having a unified synchronous cross-chain transaction, like that would be the gold standard, but that would require all of the rollups to adhere to a standard, a specific standard, and share their sequencer perhaps, which is gonna be a hard sell, not only because it's hard to get people to coordinate on a standard, but also because different rollups are meant to solve different problems, and like one specific standard might not fit all. Like Ethereum purposefully like pushes rollups to be more like risk taking and do things even differently than Ethereum. Like an Ethereum rollup may not even be an EVM chain. It can be
Yeah.
anything. So
Yeah.
that's why like pushing that sort of interop is hard. But yes, that would be like the dream.
If I may add to what
Yeah,
Alan you were saying earlier, I
go
think
ahead.
if you just use the vanilla bridging, it still doesn't cover certain kinds of applications that you would imagine building. For example, applications that require atomicity,
Yeah.
right? So imagine, I don't know, you have some app on Arbitrum and some app on, Optimism, and you want to send something from Arbitrum to Optimism and then act based, depending on what response comes out from the destination chain. You want this property of atomicity because you want to make sure that, if one half of the transactions fails, then the second half should also fail, right? And if you have, like, those guarantees are important. And I think there are certain applications that you could imagine building where these applications, these properties of atomicity will be important. And I think if you're thinking about building asynchronous composability, you have to consider atomicity. That has to be the main thing that you have to solve.
But it's also in terms of just the plain UX, right? I mean, even today, obviously, I have very fast bridging specifically for ETH and USDC and USDT using, intents and stuff like that. But even with that, it's still a bit much more cumbersome than, regular Ethereum transactions. Like even in a simple scenario, I wanna trade or buy something on a different chain. Even just moving the assets, making sure I have some ETH to pay gas, and then returning those assets to the original chain, even if it's very fast, it's still much more cumbersome than a single transaction. The best analogy I can give maybe is, if you go and try to transact on Bitcoin today, it's obviously much slower than Ethereum, but that amount of slowness is so significant that it makes you feel like you're in the 90s using Bitcoin, right? Because you need to wait a few blocks, and each block is 10 minutes. So is the end goal is just speed, or the UX is more important? In other words, okay, we can make bridging more faster, but is that enough for users? Everyone, I will love you. I will love your input.
Sure. Yeah, like I'll jump in for a second. So yeah, first off, I think the previous speakers had really great points, right? So like already the UX today is unimaginably better than just a few years or so ago. Yeah, like whatever, over 90% of use cases are probably covered. But there are all of these like edge cases where it's real pain points for people. And it's one of those things where yeah, like as you were saying, Alon, like there's just like mental overhead to thinking about all of these extra dimensions, and in particular for LPs or like market makers who are doing like very complicated transactions across like multiple chains, and like are making micro profits here and there. Yeah, like I think we can and should strive for more like atomicity and more synchronous composability.
Great. That leads me to maybe talking a bit about the technology, which potentially can kind of move us to the next era of interop, if you will. I think two key maybe three key technologies are one, we've mentioned synchronous composability. In of its own, it has a bunch of different approaches, but I think that's definitely one pillar of a technology that can be considered. ZK is definitely part of, or a major part in any of the next gen interop protocols I'm seeing. And a third is also maybe as a broader definition is what type of assets are represented on rollups, or in different words, do we need to change the default bridging that current rollups use to be more cross-chain friendly? Is it fair to say that those are the three main pillars of kind of this next gen interop we might be able to see?
I'm not sure if it's covered in your last bit, but I think some sort of ZK-fying things would also help in many ways. So some sort of an opcode that at the base layer that allows for, and I think even if you look at some of the recent proposals on synchronous composability protocols, they all assume sort of a few newer primitives that would make things much easier, much simpler for things to work. So I would say a little bit changes at the base layer as well would be very, very helpful.
What type of changes would you
So for example,
provide?
being able to verify. So basically, imagine if you have fraud proofs floating around, ZK proofs, it naturally makes things complex. And so ideally, if everything is much more, if everything is a ZK rollup, then it becomes much more easier because then you can actually verify. But if you have a rollup that only uses fraud proofs and will not use anything else, that'd be much more difficult in terms of proving atomicity and things like that, because like you have to
So
wait for those
you're
things to
referring
connect.
you're referring to native rollups, I guess.
Exactly.
Yeah. By the way, it will be cool to maybe try to Zkify existing rollups. I mean, ultimately, if you think about it, the only part that is relevant for mostly relevant is withdrawing assets in and out. So potentially, you could Zkify existing rollups, even without them knowing that. Like you can create a secondary bridge that is ZK verified, and that's what controls in and out of assets.
Yeah, I think I'm pretty sure Arbitrum is working on adding fast withdrawals through validity proofs, ZK proofs as well. And yeah, like eventually every rollup is gonna be a ZK rollup. That just is the superior tech. So there's no reason for any major rollup to be left behind. Obviously, it's more expensive, but like Edward and Co are working really hard to make it actually affordable.
Can
Yeah.
we Yeah, go ahead, everyone.
I was just going to say, yes, we are so aligned that every rollup will be a ZK rollup. And, I think this is definitely one of those things where like this vision has taken a few years to sort of materialize. You had teams like ZK Sync and Polygon leading the way on ZK adoption. And I think like a big part about our mission is just making sure that the other rollup ecosystems come along for the ride. I think between OB-Stack rollups and like Arbitrum rollups, you have like 80% of the rollup market, and like without like a clear path to making sure that those guys can also use ZK technology in like a seamless way. Like I think like a lot of the dreams of this type of interop are kind of cooked, and that's why we spend so much time focusing on that use case.
Outside of native rollups, can we maybe promote reducing the verification cost of rollups, or not rollups, but of ZK proofs on Ethereum? Because that might open up the door for massive economies of scale in terms of proof aggregation. Like if you can reduce the proof cost, you can enable more people to prove, and potentially maybe even create a whole new market for hardware specific provers that validators and pools can run.
So one thing that I've noticed in this, I mean, there were quite at least 2 or 3 attempts on this. For example, there's a project called Nebra that came up. There were a couple others. I'm not sure if they were too early to the market or maybe the demand wasn't there. But at least at that point, it felt like those projects didn't get much traction. And they were exactly doing this. We're basically trying to aggregate proofs and then be able to verify a single proof rather than individual proofs on Ethereum. So far it has not worked well, but again, this might change as things progress.
Got it. And the last bit of tech I want to maybe dive into is synchronous composability.
So sorry, if I may add one more thing, Alan. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think the main, probably in my view, the reason probably was that so there are two parts to the ZK, right? One is the generating the proofs themselves, and the second part was the verifying these proofs. To me, it felt like maybe the reason why they did not work out that well was maybe the generation part, the proof generation part was the most beefy bit.
Yeah.
And so people felt like, okay, it's better to optimize that part, right now than trying to go towards verification bit. Because if you can do that, then actually you drastically save money as a roll-up, right?
Yeah.
Or other applications. So maybe that was the one reason why it didn't work out. It hasn't worked out so far.
Yeah, there's definitely two parts to the cost of ZK on-chain verification. Obviously, the proving part, but let's assume that the proving part is going to reduce in cost and increase in efficiency as we go along. The on-chain verification part, though, is constant to the ZK proof itself. Maybe there are ZK proofs which are a bit more efficient, but all in all, if we can potentially reduce the gas costs on that, we can have really interesting economies of scale. And it does have more people using more ZK proofs on chain. Obviously, rollups are the big users of that. But I wanted to maybe kind of talk about the third pillar, which is synchronous composability. This is kind of a term that's been thrown around and been researched for the past 2 years or so, where the idea is that synchronous composability represents the current UX on Ethereum with the vision of promoting that type of UX across all rollups and rollups in Ethereum itself, where it basically has the properties of being synchronous, meaning you can have fairly complex transactions where each action or each interaction is done one by one in the same transaction. Also has atomicity, meaning that either it happens all together or it doesn't happen at all. And I think the third property of it, which is really interesting, which is composability, meaning, or in other words, you can basically do any type of interaction you want. It's not specific to, let's say, bridging or swapping and so on. What do you guys feel about synchronous composability in terms of maturity, in terms of as a goal? I think we kind of spoke a bit about it beforehand, versus the current kind of type of interop, and really in general, what do you guys feel about it, and is it worth pursuing?
I would say definitely. I would say that it's still in very early stage. You could see probably 3 or 4 different proposals of how to implement this. There's push mechanism, pull mechanism, whatnot. So I think it's still I would say work that needs to be done. But in my view, the ideal model that Mudit was speaking earlier, an ideal model would definitely be to able to make a call from Arbitrum to Optimism and then be guarantee atomicity through that. So yes, this answer is yes. It may feel like yes, we have reached the peak, and all we have to do is make bridges 5x faster or 2x faster. But I think you probably would unlock a lot more things if you allow for asynchronous composability, through shared sequencing or base sequencing or the likes.
Yeah, very much agree. Yeah, it still feels like we are very early days on synchronous composability, and many problems are still not solved yet. But that's why this is so exciting, right? So,
Mudit, any words on that?
No, 100% agreed. Like it's still way too early for it. There are obviously people who have created solutions already, but I think just like we are not mature enough as a space and where all of the rollups are for it to be a serious solution for now.
Got it. All right. Let's look into the future. What do you guys think will happen in terms of interop the next, let's say, 12 months?
So one thing that so what I'm seeing right now in practice today, and what it's not necessarily about interoperability. I think it's a step towards that. So for example, we can see today there are at least 2 or 3 based rollup stacks out there. Now, forget about interoperability for a moment, but basically the fact that you actually have chain systems or stacks, not just one chain, but like actual frameworks and SDKs that allow you to spin up a based rollup is actually still quite powerful. And I have experimented with one of those myself, and it's actually very, very fast. So especially fast doesn't like through pre-confirmation, of course, because you still have to rely on, let's say, Ethereum if you want Ethereum's finality and sequencing finality and so on. But like at the pre-confirmation, it's really, really fast. And I would say it's as fast as any of the newer rollups that are popping up or newer L1s that are popping up. So I'd say yes, entropy would be obvious next step. But I think what you could see right now today is that you have this based rollups that will go live. You will see applications and rollups using based rollups in the next. Like, I'm not saying that existing chains don't use it. Some of the rollups actually do, but like the way OP stack kind of gave this whole idea of now you need interoperability, right? Previously, if it was just Optimism, Arbitrum, people say, fine, it's okay. Because Optimism is going to run its own ecosystem, Arbitrum is going to run its own ecosystem, and they're fine in some ways. But because of OP stack, because of Arbitrum Orbit, now we do discuss about interoperability. I think you'll see the same thing happen once these base rollups actually go live. And that's happening in the next, I don't know, 6 months to up to 8 months.
So you're specifically talking about the pre-confirmation part of base rollups.
Exactly. Yeah, and the reason why what I'm basically saying that for interoperability to happen, of course, you could say, okay, you could interoperate between Optimism and Arbitrum mainnets or some of the underlying chains, but what I'm saying that you also have this need for interoperability comes from the fact that you have multiple things to play with, right? And that's happening as well on the base side of things.
Right. Mudit, Edward?
Yeah, like I think that's spot on. Like I know that the Ethereum Foundation has been doing a big push on like based rollups, and like the attention is like the topic is getting more and more attention sort of universally in our space these days. But I think as Amrit was saying, like the proof is kind of in the pudding, where you have a lot of these exciting new applications built with this architecture, but they sort of have to be a proof point, because certainly in our space, there's a bit of like a follow the leader mentality, where you sort of have to prove that it works first before people can fully commit to the full interop vision.
Got it.
Yeah, 100% agree. Like it's moving in the right direction, but yes, we need some guinea pigs for it before it gets widely picked up.
Definitely. All right. I guess last question I have, which is probably the biggest one. Up until now, interop didn't really require any change from the major rollups, right? Because most interop is kind of bolted on existing chains. It's mostly is a smart contract. Moving forward, potentially interop or improving interop will require some changes from either the rollup stacks or the actual rollups themselves. And so my question is, how likely do you think that the bigger rollups, naming Base and Arbitrum and OP and Unichain, Rollchain, all of those guys, what do you think is the likelihood of them actually changing their ways or opening up to actually facilitate a better version of interop if it requires them, either to change their sequencing software or add some kind of a sidecar transitioning to ZK proofs, for example, all of those things. What do you think is the likelihood for them in the next 12 months to do that, or some of it?
I would say highly likely. And the reason is following. So if you just take a look at Optimism, because we have been serving quite a few OP clients, we know what has happened over the last, I don't know, year or so with Optimism itself. So to give an example, when OP Stack came out, I think 3-4 months later, they launched this, their own DA layer called Redstone, which was developed by Lattice guys. And basically, it was a centralized DA solution that they had. And the recommendation from Optimism team, of course, you're free to use whatever DA layer you want, because in the end, it's open source. But one of the main recommendations from Optimism was to use their centralized DA layer. Very soon afterwards, they started working on this superchain interoperability thing. And then the recommendation changed from, move away from that DA layer to using Ethereum blob as your DA layer. And all these changes are happening in live, like within a span of 6 to 8 months, those changes are happening, which means that many of these teams are still kind of building out the core parts of their stack. And you could see that, for example, Succinct guys are working with OP on, with OP Succinct and so on. So you could see that many of these actually protocols are actually rapidly changing their underlying stack to incorporate new technologies. Yes, there will be, for some people, it'll be easier. For example, again, Edward might correct me here, but my understanding is that if you're building a ZK version of OP is actually much easier compared to building a ZK version of Arbitrum, for example. Having said that, yes, it's going to be more work for someone like Arbitrum and less work for OP, but you could see a genuine openness to actually adopt newer technologies to make their stack faster. Because in the end, it's not just you're competing with each other; you're also competing with the other existing L1s, and you want to make sure that you're up in the game there. So I would say that's highly likely they would change.
You think that the first and most let's say most change they will do is actually becoming ZK rollups instead of corpus.
Yes. And you could see that, by the way, if you just look at the sentiment from Arbitrum core scientific team, for example, at Felton, you could go back to around 2 years ago's blog post, and you could see that it was very clearly written that ZK is not something that we would ever approach, or something of that kind, right? I'm paraphrasing, but basically they were very much against ZK.
Yeah, got it.
And within a year or so, or maybe a year and a half, that tone has certainly changed. And you could see, Arbitrum working very closely with some of the ZK teams on building and integrating ZK proofs into their stack. So you could see that tone changing, even though those philosophical decisions have actually changed. And so I would not be surprised if they actually change their stack here and there, either as a sidecar or core part to make the necessary changes to make these things happen.
So I do have two follow-up questions. One is for Edward and one is for Mudit. So Edward, obviously you guys are at the epicenter of ZKifying the entire Ethereum ecosystem. So I would love your input on what is the likelihood of rollups that are currently fraud-proof rollups to convert into ZK rollups. And kind of on the same path, Mudit, on your end, you guys are obviously ZK from day one. How much demand you're seeing for actually starting up as a ZK rollup rather than adopting fraud proofs at begin with?
Sure, I'm happy to start. So yeah, definitely talking our own book a little bit here, but yes, I think very much we've seen changing of hearts and minds over the last 6 months even. So like when we talked with the Optimism team a number of months ago, I think they were pretty default ZK skeptical, same thing with Arbitrum. And then now with more and more of these, CDK OP stack style rollups, for instance, going to production, there's just more proof points that the technology is ready, that it works. And I think Optimism is starting to realize that, and they're sort of reorienting their team to think about this more aggressively. And then on the Arbitrum side of things, yeah, like we were very fortunate to be selected as Off-Chain Labs' ZK design partner. So as Amrit was saying, they, very actively want to put this on their roadmap. It's just that ZK proving Arbitrum is like a little bit more complicated due to things like stylus. And, at the end of the day, we have to make sure that we're sort of backwards compatible with like all the existing things that they have going on. I think one interesting thing is like, I think these ecosystems like Optimism, Arbitrum will join Polygon and ZK Sync in ZKifying their ecosystems. Like, I do wonder if like the very largest rollups like Base will move this quickly. I think my instinct is probably not, just because I think they view ZK as an important but not urgent thing. So, like the Base team always has tons of things going on that they're working on. So I think they will probably wait till, like OP mainnet or Arbitrum 1 goes ZK before even considering
So
it.
basically, you're giving us a huge scoop saying the next 12 months we'll see Arbitrum ZKifying itself completely. That's amazing.
I mean, I definitely don't think I can commit to that, and I don't think they can commit to that either.
Yeah.
We're supposed to go through the standard, governance process and stuff like that. But certainly, our hope is, whatever, in 12 to 18.
That will be will be amazing. Mujib, how do you guys see the demand for even starting up as a ZK rollup instead of even instead of starting as fraud proofs?
Yeah, for sure. It's increasing like every month. More and more teams want to start a ZK rollup rather than optimistic. And the reason is like the only reason really to start as an optimistic rollup right now is if you wanted cheaper transactions or higher throughput. Uh, ZK is closing that gap and it's closing it very fast. Like it's already at a point where, in terms of throughput, um, you can even prove the high throughput chains like base and so on, where
Yeah.
like relatively easily. As far as cost goes, yes, it's still an order of magnitude more expensive than optimistic rollups. So if for very cost sensitive use cases, it makes sense to go optimistic still, but we are getting there that like it just becomes meaningless. So over time, yes, you will see even more and more teams just starting as ZK rollups.
Got it. Got it. I want to maybe add another point here, which is actually something I forgot to ask before, but it does kind of connect well with this train of thought of the next 12 months. Throughout our research to kind of try to understand interop synchronous composability in specific, and obviously building up a bunch of different things around it, we found out that other than the heavy infrastructure things like ZK and just the sequencer part and all of that, there's also the plain old ERC20 representation of tokens on different rollups, which very much can prevent simple interrupt. Today, the OP standard, for example, for an ERC20 token is obviously linked to their own default bridging, meaning that if you want to create this next gen interop, it might be problematic in that sense. Or for the very least problematic if you don't want to go through the L1 in order to move assets in a very fast way or not want to use liquidity. Any one of you guys stumbled across this? Do we need to maybe start thinking and talking about changing how liquidity works in L2s in order to facilitate better cross-chain composability?
Yeah, for sure. So yes, it's harder to like move assets, like just change the bridge that assets have used from start. But the reality is like it is an asset issuer centric world, and if the asset issuer requests an L2 to switch it, most likely will happen. For example, USDT zero deployments and USDC native deployments all were like deployed as bridge tokens initially on these rollups, and then the native deployments came and the migrations happened. So if um, an actual common standard was adopted by all of these rollups, migration can happen, and that would make life much easier. Otherwise, the current gold standard sort of is to maintain a liquidity pool to switch tokens between the interop standard and the native bridge that a chain might have. Um,
Yes.
yeah.
Got it. All right. So we're coming up to close this awesome conversation. Any final remarks from anyone? Something you maybe want to bring up or you wanted to talk about but didn't get a chance?
Oh, I can chill a little bit. So if you guys are building any kinds of rollups, ZK or optimistic or base rollups, come and talk to us. We definitely will help you out. Would love to help you out.
Amazing. Edward?
Yeah, no, like I think I'll just end on like a positive note where, yeah, no, it really feels like Ethereum is going through a bit of a renaissance right now between all the great work that's happening at the Ethereum Foundation these days, the increasing institutional adoption, and I think now is a great time to work on these kinds of problems because yeah, like the Ethereum ecosystem is becoming larger and larger. The tent is growing ever bigger, and we need to figure out how all these things work together.
Mudit?
Yeah, I would just say like interop is moving in the right direction. People are starting, different rollups are starting to collaborate more and more with each other, which is the only way we solve interop. So we just need to, all of us need to work together in solving this.
Definitely. I'll finish up us with kind of a few thoughts we had the past few months. We've been chatting and talking publicly, very publicly, about the idea that validators can do more than just secure Ethereum. And I think that validators can play a major role in this next chapter of interop, either by doing based rollups or shared sequencing, or something that we've been working on called the shared publisher. I think validators themselves, as this credibly neutral layer of Ethereum, can really play a major role in facilitating this next gen interop. And in general, I think that one of the most interesting things we're seeing is that there's so much demand for rollups that I think that it presents a lot of opportunities for developing better and more comprehensive interop solutions. And I would love to see a lot of work on UX on that, a lot of attention from the EF as well, not just on intents, but other forms of interop. And in general, I think ZK is probably one of the biggest accelerators to help us get there. Whenever we're talking about interops, all of the interop solutions we have now were kind of invented a few years ago. But now I think with things like ZK, we can start imagining things which are kind of this next year. So it makes me very, very excited. And I think that also it's probably one of the biggest challenges Ethereum has, because the rollup-centric roadmap proved itself to be a very good scalability solution, but we still need to kind of make the greater Ethereum connect again to each other and unify the UX under something that is much better than it is today. And so thank you all for joining our call. This topic is obviously something that almost everyone on Ethereum stumbles across one way or the other. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for sharing your thoughts. And hopefully in the next 12 months, we'll have a better interrupt than we had today. Thank you.
Thank you, Alon. Thank you for listening.
Thanks for hosting, man. Appreciate it.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.